Hi everyone, so today I'm going to give you a short introduction on one of the major components of my spiritual practice, and that is the Wheel of the Year. I made a blog post about this actually very early on when I started the blog because it's such a major component to most earth-based spiritualities and my own practice. And because I felt like it's a phrase that gets thrown around quite a lot that might confuse people if they're coming to this for the first time, if they've no idea about neo-paganism or earth-based spirituality or Wicca or anything like that. So the Wheel of the Year is essentially the 8 major holidays, holy days, Sabbaths. You'll hear quite a lot of different terms thrown around for this, but they are the 8 major celebrations that I would say most pagans will celebrate. Now that's a bit of a generalization obviously, because the pagan umbrella, pagan umbrella term is quite broad. It encompasses quite a lot of different belief systems, quite a lot of different practices, very different practices and religious systems. And I will talk about the term pagan or paganism another time too, to kind of clear up any misconceptions, or, well, it's a difficult topic to talk about, particularly within the pagan community, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the Wheel of the Year is what most pagans follow. It is the celebrations that most pagans follow, or most people with an earth-based spirituality. Now the eight celebrations on that Wheel of the Year, they're not actually all drawn from one tradition. They are basically an amalgamation of a couple of different Northern European pagan traditions, ancient pagan traditions. And quite a lot of them can be seen together in various cultures. For example, in Ireland there is evidence of at least 6 of them having been celebrated at some time, not necessarily at the same time, but at some time. And then some of the names are Germanic. There are various different names that can be used, and things like that. So yeah, the 8 celebrations together is a fairly modern invention. It's not something that is an ancient practice that is being continued today or anything like that, but it has become quite ubiquitous, and there is quite, for good reason, it's quite a good system, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Initially, actually, with Wicca, Gerald Gardner actually only celebrated the 4 fire festivals, and I'll talk about what they are in a second. So there were originally only 4, and I'm not actually entirely sure who brought in the other 4, but it was fairly early on in the development of what was then called witchcraft and is now called Wicca. It was fairly early on in the development of that the other 4 festivals came in, and it does make sense. It kind of is a quite organic kind of system. So the 8 festivals are spread very evenly throughout the year, the calendar year. The 4 most obvious ones to most people will be the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes. So the solstices happen in the middle of June, in the middle of December, and that is when the days are the longest and the shortest. Well, in the northern hemisphere, the days will be the longest, and we will have the longest day of the year around the 21st of June, which is the summer solstice, and we will have the shortest day of the year around the 21st of December, which is the winter solstice. And then the 2 equinoxes obviously happen in between those 2 points. So they happen around the 20th or 21st of September and March. So September, both of those days, the equinox means equal night. So the day and the night are equal on those days. So that basically just means that we're transitioning into a period of greater light with the spring equinox. We are transitioning from having longer nights and shorter days into having shorter nights and longer days, and vice versa with the autumn equinox in September. So these are very obvious days to celebrate in any earth-based spirituality because they are easily observable. They are, they're astrological events, and they are things that have been definitely celebrated by humans for a long time. They've been noted by humans, and there is something particularly special about noting the shortest day and the longest day, and kind of welcoming back the sun and things like that. So that is quite organic. But the funny thing is, those 4 holidays were not actually the 4 original ones. The 4 original ones were the 4 fire festivals, and these are originally Irish pagan festivals. They were probably celebrated in Britain as well, but I'm not actually, off the top of my head now, I'm not actually sure about that. But they are very definitely Irish, and the names are Irish. They were celebrated in Ireland at some point. There are references to them in the Irish literature. So they are what people now call the cross quarters. They happen in between, say, the solstices and the equinoxes. So so the four of them are Imbolc or Imbolg, a couple of different names for that one, which is the 1st of February, generally speaking. Then there is Bealtaine or Beltane, various other names for that, which happens on the 1st of May. Then there is Lunasa, I think that's the only name I've ever heard for that one, which is the 1st of August. And then there is Samhain, which is the 1st of November. These will often be celebrated the night before, so the 31st of October. Generally speaking, Imbolc is usually on the 1st of February, but the others are often celebrated kind of the night before. So these festivals might seem a bit arbitrary to you if you live in America or whatever, but here in Ireland, they actually mark the beginning of the seasons for us. For us, the summer solstice happens at midsummer, and we call it midsummer. The winter solstice happens for us in the middle of winter, and we call it midwinter. So the beginning of winter is at Samhain, and the beginning of spring is at Imbolc. So for us in Ireland, basically spring is February, March, April. Summer is May, June, July. Now, not everybody will go along with this because people like to go along with different systems, and people argue that the temperature doesn't match up. But to me, it makes sense. Temperature lags behind light. That's the way it works with the year, and that the temperature takes a while to change on the Earth because it takes the Earth a while to heat up after the light starts to come back. Personally, I prefer to acknowledge the seasons in terms of how much light, how much sun we're getting. And you definitely see this reflected in the Earth. Here in Ireland, we don't have very harsh winters, so we will start to see growth again. Pretty much in February, we'll start to see flowers blossoming and things like that. So it makes sense for us. So that's what they are. Those are their origins. Now, the names vary hugely as well. I'm actually not even going to go into all that because you can check out the Wikipedia article yourself. There are various names. Most of the names for the actual astrological, the solstices and the equinoxes, are generally sort of Germanic names that are used. I don't use those names because they're just not within my tradition. And also now, like I said, the 4 fire festivals are Irish, and in Ireland we never celebrated, as far as I can tell, we never celebrated all 8. But there is evidence that we celebrated the summer solstice and the winter solstice, definitely. There's no question about that, as far as I'm concerned. Now, we don't have names for them, we don't know much about it. It seems to have been older. It was before the fire festivals, I think, that these were celebrated. And yeah, there's basically no information as to what this might have looked like in Ireland. But those two are very important to me for that reason. I would say that those two are the biggest holidays for me. So I think that's given you a rough outline. That took a lot longer to get through than I thought it would. But I'll just briefly talk about what people do on those days and things like that. So generally speaking, because when we're talking about the Wheel of the Year, it's usually pagans who celebrate the Wheel of the Year. So usually people will be doing ritual of some kind. If people are practitioners of magic, then they might do magical working on that day. Traditions will often have kind of set rituals that are done on those days. They might have set stories. So there might be various kind of mythologies that are associated with the different days of the year, and there are various different stories that are associated with them. And also there might be some classical mythology that will be associated with the days. Obviously, like the story of Persephone and Demeter and its counterparts in other parts of the world. That can be celebrated at the equinoxes and things like that. There are various different mythologies. If you went through each of the 8 days, you will definitely find a myth somewhere in some culture that you can draw on for that day. in order to create your ritual, in order to have a focal point for the ritual and that kind of thing. So the reason I follow it is probably pretty self-explanatory, as I've just said that 6 of the days are traditional to Ireland. The 4 days of the the four fire festivals, they make organic sense for me to celebrate because they are the beginnings of the seasons here in Ireland. And they have a long history of being celebrated. So I actually would have grown up with them being marked. I would have, grown up with Láda Bríde, which is St. Bridget's Day, which is on the 1st of February, and that, that's basically still Imbolc. It's just being celebrated differently. It was Christianized, as a lot of things obviously were, and it's still being celebrated today. And the same with most of them. Lughnasa, not so much. Samhain, obviously, is now Halloween. That's a huge one. And Bealtaine to some extent. Or Beltane as some people call it. I don't know if Beltane is literally like the way it was spelt in a different country, maybe in, no, I'm not even going to say, I'm not even going to make a guess at that, because I always see that and it irritates me, because to me it's a misspelling, but it might not be a misspelling, it might actually just be the equivalent celebration in a different language, probably a different Gaelic language really, but different Celtic language anyway. So Bealtaine would still be definitely recognised here as well. The summer solstice is actually recognised too. It's St. John's Eve and there's various stuff. Oh, and Lughnasa, there is the whole thing with Crumcruach and Cruach Fórig, and people go on that's a mountain in Kerry and Kerry? Am I thinking of the wrong place? Sorry, there's a different one. Is it Cruach Fórig and Kerry? No, I think it's a different one. Can't remember the name of it right now. Oh, that's going to annoy me. Anyway, people go on a pilgrimage, and there's this association with Crumcruach or Cruach Dubh, who was seemingly an old Irish deity, but then the story that has remained primarily in the folklore is that of basically St. Patrick beating him or that kind of thing. So it's turned into a pilgrimage for St. Patrick on that day. So they are very much alive in the folklore, in the culture. It's not that they are, dead in any way. The only two that I've obviously added in are the 2 equinoxes, and it just makes sense for balance and that kind of thing. But I will say that those 2 are probably, I don't know if they're the least important to me. I don't know, they're all kind of, equal. I wouldn't say that I have necessarily say that I have favourites apart from maybe the 2 solstices, but however. So that kind of explains why I follow this particular Wheel of the Year. I think if I had known nothing about the Wheel of the Year as a concept, if I'd known nothing about those 8 holidays, which obviously I already did coming back to my spirituality because I had originally come across Wicca and come to it through Wicca. I think if I hadn't, I probably would have come up with the same days to celebrate anyway. I can't imagine that I would have come up with any other system because 6 of them would have come extremely organically, and it only makes sense to throw in the 2 equinoxes as well. So I call it the Wheel of the Year because that's what everyone calls it in this community, and most people that you will talk to who follow an earth-based spirituality will understand what you're talking about when you say the Wheel of the Year. But it's definitely something that comes very organic to me. What I do on these days is it's kind of changed and evolved gradually over time. I do ritual, which I pretty much do to mark most occasions. And recently I've sort of been doing path workings. I will kind of have an idea in advance about what I want to focus on, something that I want to work through. I might have a deity that I want to commune with or that kind of thing, and I will have an idea of how the path working is going to start or be set up. I will often speak some poetry that is sort of relevant to the path working, and then I will sort of do the path working, which is sort of like doing active imagination. And that's in the heart of the ritual. I set up Sacred Space in the way that I always do, which I did do a video on, I think, but I might have to do another video on that at some point if I decide that I want to share more detail about how I do that. So that was a much longer video than I was going to make for this, but it's actually obviously a much more convoluted topic than I thought it was. I hope that gives you an idea, if you're new to this, what people are talking about when they say the Wheel of the Year. If you look it up, there's loads of stuff online, loads of resources online, obviously, if you want to know more. And Ronald Hutton has a great book, which I actually have never gotten around to finishing. I started it, but it's in my pile of things to read, called The Stations of the Sun. And it's not about just the Wheel of the Year, it's about a whole host of pagan and other basically all festivals in Britain. Now Britain as opposed to Ireland, so it'll be slightly different. Slightly different focus, but that is supposed to be a great book if you want to learn more about that kind of thing. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. Hope this was useful, informative. Any questions, let me know, and take care.